Zayden had always been the kind of person people overlooked. Not because he was strange or unfriendly, and not because he lacked intelligence or kindness. In truth, if anyone had taken the time to truly observe him, they might have noticed that Zayden possessed a quiet strength that many louder people never developed. But the reality of his life was simple and difficult to accept. No one really noticed him. In crowded places, conversations flowed around him as if he were invisible. People laughed together, shared ideas, and built connections while Zayden often stood quietly nearby, listening more than speaking. If he tried to share a thought, it usually faded into the background. Sometimes someone else would repeat his idea moments later and receive praise for it. Zayden would simply remain silent, watching it happen again and again. At first, he believed the problem might be him. Maybe he needed to try harder. Maybe he needed to speak louder, act more confident, or push himself forward the way others did. So he tried. He began contributing more to conversations, offering help whenever someone needed it, and putting extra effort into everything he worked on. He stayed patient even when people interrupted him or ignored his words. Yet despite his efforts, very little changed. The louder personalities continued to dominate every discussion, and the most confident individuals were always the ones people admired. Zayden's hard work remained mostly unseen, quietly supporting outcomes that others proudly claimed. Over time, he began to understand a painful truth about the world: visibility often mattered more than effort. People noticed what was loud, bold, and confident, while quieter contributions often disappeared in the background. This realization could have easily filled him with bitterness, but something inside Zayden refused to become angry. Instead of blaming others, he chose to observe them more closely. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who do not truly see you. Zayden felt that loneliness many times. He watched as opportunities were offered to individuals who were less prepared but more visible. He saw praise being given to people who had done only part of the work. Sometimes he even helped others succeed, knowing that no one would ever know his role in their achievements. But instead of allowing frustration to consume him, Zayden quietly developed a powerful habit: he paid attention. Because when people ignore you, you gain something many others never develop: the ability to observe without distraction. Zayden began studying how confident individuals communicated. He listened carefully to how successful people explained their ideas. He noticed patterns in the way decisions were made and how influence worked in different situations. While others were focused on being seen, Zayden was focused on understanding. Slowly, something inside him began to change. It was not anger, and it was not jealousy. It was determination. Zayden realized that attention might come and go, but true ability stayed with a person forever. The world might ignore him today, but if he continued improving himself quietly, there would come a time when his work could no longer be overlooked. One quiet evening after a long and exhausting day, Zayden found himself walking through an empty street illuminated by soft streetlights. The night was calm, and the world felt strangely peaceful compared to the noise he had faced earlier that day. Eventually he reached a small park and sat down on a wooden bench beneath the dim glow of a nearby lamp. For a while, he simply sat there, looking up at the dark sky, thinking about everything he had experienced. He thought about the countless moments when his voice had been ignored. He remembered the times when others had received recognition for work he had helped create. He remembered the feeling of being present but unseen, included but not valued. Yet instead of feeling defeated, Zayden felt something stronger rising inside him. After several minutes of quiet reflection, he whispered something softly to himself, almost like a promise carried by the night air. Maybe they don't see me now, but one day they will. It was not a sentence filled with anger or revenge. Zayden did not dream about proving people wrong out of pride. Instead, his words carried the calm determination of someone who had decided to change his future through patience and effort. From that moment forward, he made an important decision. He would stop chasing recognition from people who never noticed him. Instead, he would invest his energy in becoming better every single day. While others spent their time seeking attention, Zayden would quietly build skills, knowledge, and discipline. He began using his time differently. When the world was busy chasing distractions, Zayden focused on learning. When others rested comfortably after doing the minimum, he continued practicing and improving himself. Progress was slow at first, almost invisible, but Zayden did not expect quick rewards. Years of being ignored had already taught him how to continue moving forward without applause. Some days were difficult. There were moments when exhaustion whispered that his efforts might never change anything. There were nights when doubt appeared, asking whether anyone would ever truly notice his work. But each time those thoughts appeared, Zayden remembered the quiet promise he had made to himself on that lonely bench under the streetlight. And so he kept going. Day after day, month after month, he continued building himself quietly. The world still saw the same quiet person standing in the background, but beneath that calm surface something powerful was slowly growing. Zayden was not becoming louder or more arrogant. Instead, he was becoming stronger, wiser, and more capable with every passing day. The truth about transformation is that it often happens silently. The world rarely notices the early stages of someone's growth. People only pay attention once success becomes visible. But by the time the world finally noticed Zayden, he would no longer be the invisible man they once ignored. He would be someone they could not overlook anymore. And his journey had only just begun. Zayden's life did not suddenly change after the promise he made to himself that night. The world did not magically begin noticing him, and people did not suddenly start respecting his efforts. In fact, for a long time, everything looked exactly the same from the outside. He still moved through life quietly, still spoke less than others, and still watched as louder personalities attracted attention and praise. But inside him, something had shifted. Zayden no longer measured his value by the recognition he received from others. Instead, he focused on becoming better than he had been the day before. Every morning, he woke up with the same quiet determination. While many people around him complained about how unfair life was, Zayden decided that complaining would never change anything. The only thing he truly controlled was the effort he gave each day. And so he began working on himself in ways that no one else could see. He spent hours learning new skills, studying the habits of successful people, and practicing discipline in small everyday actions. When others finished their work and relaxed, Zayden continued pushing himself to improve. Sometimes the progress felt incredibly slow. Some days it seemed like all his effort was disappearing into the same invisible space where his voice had always gone. But Zayden reminded himself of something important: the strongest foundations are always built quietly. There were moments when life tested his patience. Occasionally he would see someone receive an opportunity that he had secretly hoped for. Sometimes he would hear others being praised for work he had helped support. In those moments, a brief feeling of disappointment would pass through him, but he refused to let that disappointment turn into bitterness. Instead, he treated every experience as another lesson. Zayden had begun to understand something that many people never realize. Recognition often arrives much later than effort. The world usually notices results, not the years of struggle that created them. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in a crowded room while several people discussed a new project that everyone seemed excited about. Zayden had spent weeks thinking about ideas that could make the project stronger. When the discussion paused for a moment, he carefully shared one of his thoughts. For a few seconds, no one responded. Then the conversation simply moved forward as if he had never spoken. Zayden sat quietly again, watching the discussion continue. A few minutes later, another person suggested almost the exact same idea he had mentioned earlier. This time, the room reacted differently. People nodded enthusiastically, praising the suggestion and discussing how useful it could be. For a moment, Zayden felt the familiar sting of being overlooked. It would have been easy to interrupt and point out that the idea had originally been his. But he chose not to. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and observed something interesting. The idea itself was not what captured attention. The confidence behind the voice had made the difference. That realization stayed with him long after the meeting ended. Later that evening, as he walked through the quiet streets again, Zayden thought deeply about what he had seen. He realized that success was not only about ability. It was also about presence, communication, and the courage to stand behind one's ideas. From that day forward, Zayden began working on more than just his skills. He also started strengthening his confidence. It did not happen overnight. Confidence for someone who had spent years being ignored does not grow instantly. It develops slowly through repeated effort and small victories. Zayden practiced expressing his thoughts more clearly. He trained himself to speak with calm certainty instead of hesitation. At first, it felt uncomfortable. But every step forward made him stronger. The world still treated him the same way for a long time. People still overlooked him in conversations, and opportunities still seemed to appear elsewhere. Yet Zayden noticed something different inside himself. The frustration that once accompanied those moments had faded. He was no longer seeking approval. He was building capability. And capability has a powerful way of changing a person's future. Months passed, and then years slowly followed. Zayden continued improving quietly, focusing on growth even when no one seemed to notice. Many people around him chased quick success, jumping from one idea to another whenever they felt impatient. Zayden took a different path. He believed in steady progress rather than sudden recognition. During those years, he learned skills that most people ignored because they required patience. He strengthened his ability to solve problems, to think strategically, and to remain calm in difficult situations. Slowly, the quiet man who had once been invisible was becoming someone very different. Yet the world still had not noticed. But Zayden understood something that others did not. The moment when everything changes rarely arrives with warning. It appears suddenly, often when least expected. And when that moment finally came for Zayden, it would test everything he had been building during the years when no one was paying attention. The quiet struggle that had shaped him was preparing him for an opportunity that would soon appear, an opportunity that would finally allow the world to see what had been growing silently within him all along. For years, Zayden had remained in the shadows. He had worked quietly, learned relentlessly, and strengthened himself without applause. Yet the world around him continued to overlook his presence. And then one day, something changed, not with a loud announcement, but with a small opportunity that would alter the course of his life. It happened at a community event, a gathering meant to showcase ideas and projects from local talents. Zayden had almost decided not to attend. After all, events like this had never offered him much before. But something inside him urged him to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet persistence that had carried him through years of being ignored. Whatever it was, he found himself walking into the hall, unnoticed, just as he always had been. The room buzzed with people networking and showing off their work. Zayden scanned the area, observing quietly. His eyes fell on a table where a few organizers seemed frustrated. They were trying to solve a problem, something small but important, a task they had struggled with all day. Without thinking too much, Zayden walked over and offered a simple solution, one he had already mastered quietly during his long hours of practice. At first, no one reacted. The room was busy, and the organizers were skeptical. But Zayden didn't hesitate or try to defend himself aggressively. He calmly explained the approach and demonstrated how it could be applied. Within minutes, the problem was solved. Everyone around him paused and looked at him for the first time. That brief moment of attention, small as it was, ignited something powerful inside Zayden. For the first time in his life, someone had seen his ability and acted upon it immediately. The organizers thanked him, and word began to spread across the event. People who had never noticed him before now approached him with questions, ideas, and interest. Zayden felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction, relief, and a quiet confidence that he had never experienced before. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a turning point. That small recognition was all it took to open doors that had been closed for years. People began to notice Zayden not because he demanded attention, but because his skills and quiet determination made him impossible to ignore. The world had finally begun to catch up with the effort he had poured into himself. From that day forward, opportunities started appearing more frequently. Offers to collaborate, invitations to share his knowledge, and even requests for guidance came to him unexpectedly. Zayden realized that the years of being overlooked were not wasted. They had prepared him for this moment, a moment when he could step forward with confidence and show the world the strength he had been building quietly. Zayden's journey taught him a vital lesson: recognition is rarely instant, but preparation is always rewarded. While others might seek immediate approval, he understood that the foundation laid in silence would eventually become unshakable. He also discovered another truth, that being ignored is not a weakness, but a training ground. In the shadows, he had learned patience, resilience, observation, and self-reliance. Those who were celebrated early often lacked the depth that Zayden had cultivated in years of quiet effort. Standing in that hall, surrounded by people who had once ignored him, Zayden realized he had finally crossed a threshold. The man who had been invisible for so long was no longer the same. He had grown stronger, wiser, and ready to face challenges with unwavering determination. And while the road ahead was still long, Zayden knew one thing clearly: the world would never underestimate him again. After that small turning point at the community event, Zayden's life began to shift in ways he had only dreamed about for years. But unlike the sudden fame or luck that others often experience, his rise was steady, deliberate, and built on the years of preparation he had invested quietly. He learned that success does not usually announce itself with a spotlight; it grows silently, quietly gathering momentum until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. In the months following the event, Zayden started receiving invitations to speak at workshops and contribute to projects that matter. At first, he was nervous. Years of being ignored had left a subtle hesitation in his voice, a shadow of doubt he had to consciously overcome. But every time he spoke or shared his knowledge, he realized something extraordinary: people were actually listening. They valued what he had to say. They respected his perspective. And that feeling, the sense that his presence now carried weight, fueled him even more. Zayden also began to notice another pattern: while recognition was powerful, it was meaningless without continued growth. He doubled down on his learning. Each day, he would dedicate hours to refining his skills, practicing leadership, and building a deeper understanding of the work he loved. Unlike others who chased attention or validation, Zayden focused on becoming so good that no one could ignore the results of his efforts. He knew that talent backed by consistency was unstoppable. People who had once overlooked him started to take notice. Former classmates, colleagues, and acquaintances began asking for advice, seemingly surprised at how capable he had become. Some even tried to belittle his achievements or suggest that his success was a matter of luck. But Zayden had grown beyond needing approval or acknowledgement from them. He had learned that true power comes from within, from the discipline, resilience, and integrity that no one can take away. As opportunities grew, so did Zayden's impact. He started mentoring others quietly, sharing the lessons he had learned about persistence, self-belief, and the value of hard work. He spoke at local events, wrote guides, and even helped young professionals develop their skills. But unlike many who chase fame, Zayden remained humble. He didn't need to be the center of attention. He had learned that real influence comes from the value you create, not the recognition you receive. His rise wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, moments when projects failed or opportunities slipped through his fingers. But these moments no longer crushed him. Each failure became a lesson, a small step in the process of growth. Zayden learned to embrace failure as a tool, not as a judgment. He remembered the years of being ignored, and he realized that nothing could stop a person who refused to quit. One evening, as he reflected on how far he had come, Zayden realized the irony of life. The very invisibility that had once frustrated him had prepared him for everything he was now achieving. Because he had been ignored, he had cultivated patience, resilience, and focus. Because he had been overlooked, he had learned the value of silent work and long-term thinking. What others sought instantly, he had built quietly, brick by brick, until it became unshakable. By now, Zayden was no longer a quiet observer in the background. He had become a trusted problem solver, a respected professional, and a source of inspiration for many who had struggled like he once had. People who had doubted him or ignored him were now looking at him with admiration, and sometimes even envy. But Zayden never let that affect his humility. Instead, he used it as a reminder that recognition is temporary, while capability lasts a lifetime. He also realized something deeply motivating: success is never just about achieving goals. It's about transforming the person you are along the way. The Zayden who once stood silently in the background was unrecognizable, not because he had changed his core values, but because he had refined his strengths, honed his skills, and built unshakable confidence. Through this journey, Zayden began to inspire a ripple effect. People who watched him rise started believing in themselves. They realized that being ignored was not the end of their story. They saw that dedication, patience, and consistent effort could turn invisibility into influence, doubt into confidence, and struggle into triumph. Zayden's rise became a living example of something few understand: success is not about being noticed first, it's about being prepared when the moment finally comes. And when that moment arrives, the world cannot ignore you, no matter how long it took to get there. By the time Zayden reflected on his journey, he realized that the path of being overlooked had been a gift in disguise. Every year of struggle, every ignored effort, and every moment of doubt had been preparing him for this rise. And now, standing on the threshold of new achievements, he knew something profoundly motivating: the man who had once been invisible had finally become unstoppable. By now, Zayden's life had transformed in ways he had once only imagined in quiet moments alone. The years of being overlooked, of watching others receive praise for work he had quietly done, had forged a strength in him that no one could take away. But true triumph, Zayden realized, was not simply about personal success, it was about becoming a force that could inspire others to rise above invisibility, to transform struggle into achievement, and to build their own futures with patience and perseverance. The world began noticing Zayden in ways that were impossible to ignore. Invitations to speak at events, collaborate on projects, and mentor aspiring professionals came pouring in. Yet, despite the attention, Zayden remained grounded. He had learned that fame is fleeting, but the impact you leave through consistent effort lasts forever. Recognition had finally arrived, but it was no longer his goal, it was a byproduct of the years he had spent perfecting his craft. Zayden began taking on bigger challenges. Where others saw impossible tasks, he saw opportunities to test his abilities. Each challenge strengthened his skills and expanded his influence. He learned to make decisions with confidence, to lead without arrogance, and to inspire without demanding attention. His journey had taught him that leadership was not about the spotlight, it was about guiding others toward success while remaining true to oneself. Along the way, Zayden also encountered skeptics. People who had once dismissed him, colleagues who had ignored his contributions, and even rivals who sought to test his resolve appeared in his path. But years of being overlooked had given him an unusual resilience. Criticism no longer shook him. Setbacks no longer discouraged him. He had learned to measure his worth not by the approval of others, but by the consistent application of his own values and skills. Zayden also remembered the loneliness of being invisible. He used that memory as fuel, turning empathy into action. He mentored young people who were quietly struggling, offering guidance, encouragement, and wisdom that went far beyond technical skill. He helped them understand that being unnoticed was not a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance to grow silently, build resilience, and prepare for the moment when the world could no longer ignore them. Over time, Zayden's influence grew beyond individual achievements. He became known as someone whose success was built on integrity, patience, and relentless effort. People began to recognize him not just for what he accomplished, but for the mindset and discipline that enabled him to rise from invisibility to impact. His story became a symbol, a living reminder that being ignored does not define your potential. Yet Zayden never forgot the early years. He remembered the sting of being overlooked, the frustration of speaking and being unheard, the quiet moments on empty streets when he whispered to himself that one day the world would notice. Those memories became a source of humility. They reminded him that anyone, no matter how quiet or unnoticed, has the power to rise if they commit to growth and perseverance. Finally, one day, Zayden stood at a large gathering, looking out at a room filled with people whose lives he had touched. Young professionals he had mentored, colleagues he had guided, and strangers inspired by his story now looked to him with admiration and respect. And in that moment, Zayden felt the profound truth of his journey. Success is not about the applause you receive along the way, it is about the unwavering effort, the quiet determination, and the courage to keep moving forward when no one is watching. Zayden spoke to the room, sharing his journey, not as a boast, but as a message of hope. He told them that invisibility is not a weakness, but a chance to prepare. He explained that patience, discipline, and consistent effort are far more powerful than the fleeting praise of attention seekers. He reminded them that the quiet struggle of today can become the unstoppable success of tomorrow. And as he finished, the room erupted in applause, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. The man who had been ignored for years, the quiet observer who had been invisible to the world, had finally become someone impossible to overlook. Zayden's life became a testament to a simple, powerful truth: being ignored is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a journey that can transform struggle into strength, patience into skill, and invisibility into impact. Every day spent learning, improving, and persevering quietly builds a future that the world cannot deny. By the time Zayden reflected on all he had achieved, he realized that his journey had been about far more than personal success. It was about resilience, growth, and inspiring others to believe in the power of their own silent efforts. The invisible years had forged him into a man who could not be ignored, not because he demanded attention, but because his persistence, skill, and unwavering belief in himself had made him unstoppable. And in that realization, Zayden finally understood the most profound lesson of all: the world may ignore you today, but if you continue to grow, learn, and persevere, one day, you will become someone impossible to overlook.